The glare of the stage lights was almost blinding. It wasn't just the raw wattage, but the way it bounced off the sequins of my gown, turning my vision into a shimmering kaleidoscope. My heart, hummingbird trapped in a cage, hammered against my ribs. I forced a smile, one that I prayed didn't look as shaky as I felt. The crown, a ridiculous concoction of glittering stones, felt heavy on my head, each point digging into my scalp like a tiny, insistent finger. It was real. They'd announced my name, Elara Vance, Miss Magnolia. The words still echoed, slightly distorted in my own ears. I'd spent years of early mornings, grueling workouts, endless rehearsals. Tears, both of frustration and exhaustion, had soaked more than one practice dress. Every calorie meticulously counted, every blemish scrutinized, every curve perfected. And now, here I was, basking in the triumphant glow, the culmination of my sacrifices. The applause was deafening, roaring wave that washed over me, threatening to drown out the nagging whisper in the back of my mind. I tried to focus on the faces in the crowd. My parents, beaming so hard I thought their cheeks might crack. My coach, Mrs. Sterling, a woman whose stern facade had hid a heart of gold, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was all a perfect picture, a postcard-worthy moment. Then I saw them. Not the usual well-wishers, not the cheering spectators. In the periphery of my vision, behind the stage lights, in the shadows that danced along the edge of the grand hall, their faces hovered, pale, almost translucent, with eyes that were impossibly dark. They weren't clapping, weren't smiling. They simply watched, their gazes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. I blinked, thinking it was just the fatigue. The lights were playing tricks on me, that was it. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the other contestants, lined up behind me like a shimmering, graceful army. I saw Maya, her green eyes bright with genuine happiness for me, and gave her a tight smile. It was then it hit me, the sense that this victory wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. Every woman who had stepped onto that stage, bared her soul, and demonstrated our resilience. A wave of warmth, that genuine feeling of camaraderie, washed over me. It was short-lived. The MC's voice, usually so smooth and reassuring, now sounded distant, almost muffled. I could feel the weight of the crown pressing down, not just physically, but something heavier, something else. It felt like a living thing, burrowing into my skull. The applause became a low, guttural hum, the kind you might hear deep in the woods at night. The pale figures in the shadows hadn't moved. They were still there, their dark eyes boring into me. Panic bloomed in my chest, cold and clammy. I tried to rationalize it. They were probably just stagehands, maybe a bit odd looking, that was it. My mind was playing tricks, conjuring up monsters where none existed. I was tired and emotionally drained. It was understandable. The post-crowning interviews were a blur. Reporters shoved microphones in my face, their questions blending into a meaningless drone. I forced smiles, gave rehearsed answers, all while fighting the urge to tear the crown from my head and run. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, each pale face now sharper, more defined. I could see the minute fluctuations in the shadows, the barely there twitch of a lip, the almost imperceptible tilt of a head. They were closer now, or was it me moving closer to them? Backstage, the energy of the competition ebbed away, replaced by a strange, unsettling silence. I was alone in my dressing room. Or so I thought. The mirror reflected my face, twisted with a kind of terror. I'd never experienced before. And behind me, in the reflection, I saw them. They were closer. Still, their pallid faces pressed against the edges of my mirrored world. I spun around, frantically, heart hammering a rhythmic tune. The room was empty, only shimmering gowns on racks and scattered makeup palettes mocked me. I ran to the mirror again. They were there. Closer. So close, some of them were almost overlapping my own reflection. I had to get it off. The crown. It was the source of whatever was happening. I reached up, my fingers trembling, and tried to pull it off. It wouldn't budge. I tugged harder, but it was like it was fused to my head. Panic clawed at the edges of my sanity. I could feel them now, not just see them. A cold, prickly sensation crawled across my skin, like 1,000 tiny insects. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, and cloying. The silence wasn't empty, it was filled with a low, rhythmic whispering that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I stumbled backward, knocking over a dress rack. The metal clanged against the floor, a pathetic sound that seemed to invite more of the whispering. The faces in the mirror were no longer blurry. They were clear, distinct, each one with eyes that held a depth of ancient malice. Their mouths moved, but I couldn't hear the words, only a low, guttural sound. Then, one of them moved. It wasn't the jerky, awkward movement of a reflection. This was fluid, deliberate. One pale hand reached out, breaking through the mirrored surface, its long, spindly fingers reaching for me. I screamed, a strangled cry that was swallowed by the whispering. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, unresponsive. The hand clasped around my wrist, its touch icy cold, sending shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. I felt myself being drawn in, like a current pulling me under. The mirror rippled, the room around me twisting and distorting. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The faces in the reflected world were no longer watching. They were hungry. I saw my own reflection, a pale, terrified image staring back from the mirror. But it wasn't just my reflection anymore. It was becoming like them. The light in my eyes, the color of my skin, it was fading, transforming into the dull, lifeless hues of the creatures that were pulling me into their world. The last thing I saw, before I was fully pulled through, was the crown, still glinting on my head, a final, desperate sparkle in the void. It was theirs now, and by extension, so was I, and I understood, with a chilling clarity, that this victory hadn't been mine at all. It was the ancient, chilling victory of the shadows, and the glittering crown had only been a lure. A perfect, sparkling trap.